I just want to check my balance, sir.
This bank is not for lemonade money, sweetheart. Try the ATM down the block. That was the first thing the bank manager said, loud enough for the whole lobby to hear, when a young black girl walked in wearing scuffed-up shoes and holding a wrinkled envelope. And just like that, every pair of eyes turned to her. Some smirked, some looked away, but not one person, not one, stepped up to stop what came next. She stood there, barely 15 years old. Her hair was neatly braided. Her smile, sunlight, and her eyes, so clear, so honest, you'd think the world had never heard her. But it had, and it was about to try again. The bank was the oldest in Savannah. Mahogany counters, brass railings, a chandelier so big it could crush a minivan. It was the kind of place where the floor didn't creak, your self-worth did. And there she was, Zariah Monroe, wearing a hand-me-down skirt, holding her breath, and clutching a bank card like it was her last lifeline. All she said was, "I'd like to check my balance, please." And he laughed. The manager, Bradley Peen, white, tailored suit, 50 years of Southern pride in his voice, leaned over the counter and said, "Balance? What balance? Girl, you can't check what you don't have." The laughter that followed, it didn't just come from him. It came from the room. A low ripple of chuckles, pitying smirks, polite snickers behind pearl necklaces and pocket squares. But here's the thing about underestimating people. Sometimes when you laugh at the wrong girl, the joke ends up on you. Because the second that teller typed in her account number, the entire room changed. The monitor blinked. A number appeared, and for the first time that morning, Bradley Keene stopped smiling. He blinked, checked it again, and then, louder than he meant to, he said, "This has to be a mistake." But it wasn't. That moment, that silence, that sudden shift from arrogance to disbelief, that's the exact second when the black story you're about to hear turned into a lesson. This isn't just a story about a girl with worn-out shoes and a secret bank balance. This is about dignity, legacy, what it means to rise above when the world expects you to disappear. You're watching Hidden Worth, where true value doesn't come with a price tag. If this story already has you leaning in, stay with us, because what Zariah does next will not only silence the room, but might just change how you see the world. Zariah Monroe didn't walk into that bank to prove a point. She walked in because she didn't have a choice. 3 weeks earlier, her mother, Althea Monroe, collapsed during a double shift at the Waffle House off Victory Drive. Chest tightness, shortness of breath. The manager called an ambulance, but Althea refused to get in. Not because she wasn't scared, but because she knew what that ride would cost. She was a single mom. No insurance, no sick leave. If she missed 1 week of work, the rent was late. 2 weeks, the lights went off. 3, they'd be out on the street. But Zariah saw through it. She always had. That night, while her mom slept propped up on a couch pillow, Zariah searched the kitchen drawer, found a key taped under the edge, and unlocked the small metal box her mom had kept hidden in the closet since Zariah was 9. Inside was a black envelope. No return address. Just her name, Zariah Monroe, written in her mother's tidy handwriting. Inside the envelope was a bank card, a note, and a line of numbers, an account number. If anything happens, go to the branch on Forsyth. Do not trust anyone else. Ask for a balance inquiry. Nothing more. You'll understand when the time comes. The time had come. Zariah had tried everything else. She skipped meals at school to stretch their grocery budget, sold bracelets she made by hand at the flea market on Saturdays, even cleaned out the neighbor's garage for $20 and a bag of frozen chicken. But it wasn't enough. Her mom's condition was getting worse. The coughing fits had turned into dizzy spells. Zariah started hearing her whispering to herself at night, trying to hide the pain. One day, she found her mom crying silently at the kitchen sink, hand pressed against her side. Zariah knew she needed help, real help. A doctor, medicine, a break from working until her body collapsed. So she packed the envelope, put on the cleanest clothes she owned, tied her shoes tight even though the left one had no sole grip left, and rode the bus for 40 minutes downtown. She didn't care how people looked at her. She didn't care if they laughed. She just needed to check the account. She needed to know, was there anything there? Anything her mother had hidden or planned or sacrificed for? Because if there wasn't, if she walked out of that bank empty-handed, her mother might die. And Zariah? She'd be placed in a foster home, torn from everything she knew, everything she'd worked for. The school counselor had already made the first call to Child Protective Services when Zariah came to school with her hair undone and a bruise on her arm from tripping over a mop bucket during her part-time janitor shift. One more red flag, the counselor said. That's all it takes. Zariah didn't blame her. Rules were rules. But rules didn't keep the lights on. Rules didn't buy antibiotics. And rules sure didn't put gas in the neighbor's borrowed car so you could drive your mom to urgent care. That account, that tiny plastic card with the weight of a mountain, was her last shot. Her last sliver of hope in a world that always seemed one step away from falling apart. And still, she hadn't expected laughter. She hadn't expected a grown man to mock her shoes in front of strangers. She hadn't expected to be humiliated just for walking into the room. But Zariah had been raised by a woman who taught her this. People will judge your outside, but they can never own your inside. So when the manager sneered, she didn't run. When he called her sweetheart like it was an insult, she didn't flinch. She just stood there, small, steady, and brave in a way most adults never learn to be. Because for Zariah, this wasn't about ego. It wasn't about pride. It was about her mother and the quiet, impossible hope that maybe, just maybe, her mom had pulled off something extraordinary. That maybe, despite the world chewing her up and spitting her out, Althea Monroe had left behind one last gift, one last miracle. All Zariah had to do was survive the moment and wait to see what the screen said next. Just when Zariah thought the worst part was over, when she had braved the judgmental stares, the sneers, and the sting of public humiliation, another voice cut through the lobby. "Excuse me, did you just say lemonade money?" The words came from the far end of the counter, where an older white woman stood in a wide-brimmed sun hat, clutching a canvas tote bag filled with paperwork. Her voice was calm, but it carried a sharpness that sliced right through the laughter like a hot knife through butter. The bank manager froze. Everyone else went quiet. Bradley Keene cleared his throat and attempted a polite smile. "Just a little misunderstanding, Mrs. Clifton." Her eyes narrowed beneath the brim of her hat. "That what you call it? Because it sounded like you were laughing at a child." Zariah turned toward the woman, unsure if she was friend or foe. There had been too many times in her life where people looked kind and turned cruel fast. But Maggie Clifton wasn't just any customer. Her family had held accounts at that bank for over 40 years. She had influence, real influence, the kind that came with old money and older expectations. Normally, she stayed quiet, smiled politely, wrote her checks, and went home to her craftsman house on Habersham Street. But something about the scene in front of her pulled at a memory. A memory of a young black woman who once worked as a cleaner in her late husband's law firm, who never took a lunch break but always had a smile, who wore duct-taped shoes just like those, and who once found Maggie sobbing in a locked office after her husband's funeral, sat beside her and offered her a tissue without saying a word. The same woman who'd worn a bracelet made of tiny glass beads, pink, gold, and blue. Maggie glanced at Zariah's wrist. Same bracelet, no doubt. "Is your mother's name Althea?" Maggie asked gently. Zariah's eyes widened, and she nodded slowly. Maggie turned back to Keen. Let the girl check her account, now. Keen's expression tightened. "With all due respect, Mrs. Clifton, there are privacy." "Oh, don't you start with me, Bradley. Either you process the request, or I'll have a conversation with the regional director about why one of your managers finds humor in poverty. And I assure you, it won't be a short conversation." A beat of silence. Then Keen muttered something under his breath, motioned to the nearest teller, and barked, "Do it." The teller, young, nervous, and clearly uncomfortable, waved Zariah over. Zariah hesitated for a moment, then walked to the counter, her heart pounding in her chest. She handed over the card and the slip of paper her mom had written months ago. The teller typed, and paused. "Is there a problem?" Keen snapped. The teller didn't answer right away. Her brow furrowed. She turned the screen slightly and looked at Zariah. "Can I confirm your name?" she asked, voice suddenly more formal. "Zariah Monroe," she said, quietly but clearly. The teller swallowed. "Do you have an ID?" Zariah pulled out her school ID, the kind that wasn't good for much, but showed her name and grade. The teller looked at it, then looked at her, then looked back at the screen. "I need to verify with a supervisor," she said quickly, standing up and walking toward the glass offices at the back. Keen moved toward the monitor, impatient. "What is going on? It's just a kid's account." But when he leaned over and saw the number on the screen, he stopped talking mid-sentence. He blinked, then blinked again. The smugness drained from his face so fast it left behind a raw kind of panic. Maggie Clifton watched him carefully. "What does it say, Bradley?" Keen didn't answer. Zariah stepped forward, her hands suddenly clammy, her heart now thudding so loud she couldn't hear her own breath. "What's the balance?" Still silence. Finally, the teller returned, followed by a thin, serious-looking woman in a gray blazer and name tag that read, "Miss Riley, Senior Manager." She looked at the screen, looked at Zariah, then looked at the now pale Mr. Keen. "We'll need to speak with Miss Monroe in private," Miss Riley said calmly. "Please escort her to Conference Room 2. A ripple of whispers spread across the lobby. Zariah didn't move at first. Then Maggie gently touched her shoulder. "Go ahead, sweetheart. You're about to learn something beautiful." Zariah nodded and followed the manager into the hallway, the whole room watching her as if she'd just walked out of a fairy tale. And maybe, in a way, she had. Because what waited on the other side of that hallway wasn't just numbers. It was the truth about her mother. It was the start of everything. To understand what that balance meant, what it truly represented, you'd have to go back nearly 16 years, to a second-floor walk-up on East 49th Street in Savannah. That's where Althea Monroe, Zariah's mother, built a life with nothing but grit, dignity, and borrowed time. Althea was 23 when she arrived in Georgia with a newborn in one arm and 2 duffel bags on the curb. She didn't have family in town, no friends, no degree, just a baby girl and the conviction that she would never let her daughter feel the hunger she had known growing up. She took the first job she could find, night shift janitor at a downtown office complex. Minimum wage, no benefits, but it was a paycheck, and it kept her moving. Within a year, she added a second job, weekend cleaner at a car dealership. Then a third, dishwasher at a late-night diner on the South Side. Sleep came in 2-hour bursts on the bus, in the break room, or on the couch when her daughter finally drifted off. But Althea didn't complain. She didn't have time to. Zariah never saw her mother cry, not once. Even when the power got cut off, even when the landlord threatened eviction, even when other parents at school whispered about that Monroe woman who always showed up in a stained uniform and sneakers held together with string, Althea just smiled, said, "Let them talk, baby. Let them talk while we walk." Because they walked everywhere, to daycare, to work, to the library on Saturdays. And Althea used those walks like classrooms. She taught Zariah how to spot good people by their eyes, not their clothes. She taught her how to budget with pennies, how to stretch rice and beans into 4 meals, how to stay proud even when the world wanted you to feel ashamed. But what Zariah didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Althea had a plan, a long game. A quiet secret life is happening behind the scenes. She had opened an account the year Zariah turned 5. At first, she deposited $10 a week, sometimes 5, sometimes nothing. But when she could, she added to it. Every cash tip from the diner, every bonus check, every tax refund. She researched everything she could at the public library: compound interest, savings bonds, term life insurance, trust accounts. Althea didn't have a college degree, but she had something better. She had purpose. One evening, while Zariah was coloring in the corner of the library, Althea asked a retired financial planner named Mr. Godfrey, who volunteered there once a week, if he could help her understand long-term financial tools. She told him she just wanted to make sure her daughter would never need to beg for dignity. Mr. Godfrey agreed to teach her once a month, quietly, off the books. He said she reminded him of his late wife, sharp as glass and twice as strong. Over the next 10 years, Althea built a structure so solid even a hurricane couldn't blow it over. She opened a term life insurance policy worth 7 figures. She moved her savings into a high-yield trust account that would mature when Zariah turned 18. She set automatic payments to keep it growing even if she couldn't keep working. But she told no one, not even Zariah. Because to Althea, real security wasn't loud. It didn't wear labels. It didn't show up on Instagram. It sat quietly, building strength in the dark, waiting for the day it might be needed. And when the coughing started, when Althea began waking up in the middle of the night gasping for air, she knew that day was coming sooner than she had hoped. She wrote the letter by hand, signed the account information, put everything in the black envelope, and taped the key under the kitchen drawer. Then she went back to work, because that's what Althea Monroe did. She worked, she gave, and she protected her child with the fierce, quiet love of a woman who knew the world wouldn't protect them for her. So when Zariah stood in that bank lobby, clutching the card with trembling fingers, she wasn't just holding numbers. She was holding proof. Proof that her mother hadn't just survived. She had outplanned them all. Just when Zariah thought the mystery was over, when she assumed the account number would explain everything, she learned the truth went even deeper. Inside Conference Room 2, the air was still. The walls were lined with framed certificates and oil paintings meant to impress wealthy clients. But Zariah barely noticed. Her mind was spinning. Miss Riley, the senior manager, sat across from her with the kind of careful expression people use when they're not sure if they're about to change someone's life or ruin it. Zariah gripped the edge of her chair. "Can I see the balance?" Miss Riley nodded slowly, turned the monitor toward her, and said nothing. The number on the screen wasn't just big, it was surreal. $2,634,718. Zariah blinked. She read it again, thought maybe her eyes were playing tricks on her. "That's mine?" she whispered. "Yes," Miss Riley said gently. "Your name is on the trust. You're the sole beneficiary." Zariah's throat tightened. She thought of her mom's face last week, pale and tired, trying to smile even though she couldn't stand without leaning on the sink. She thought of the eviction notice folded behind the toaster. She thought of the list of medications she couldn't afford, the school field trip she'd skipped because lunch money was more important. And now? This? She shook her head. But how? Before Miss Riley could answer, there was a knock at the door. It opened slowly, and a tall, older black man stepped inside. He wore a navy suit and glasses that rested low on his nose. His walk was steady, but his face carried the weight of too many truths. "Zariah?" he asked. "May I come in?" Zariah looked at Miss Riley, who nodded. "This is Mr. Godfrey. He knew your mother. He helped her set all this up." Zariah stood up instinctively, unsure of what to say. Mr. Godfrey extended a gentle hand. "I promised your mama, if anything ever happened, I'd be the one to explain it." He sat down, folding his hands. "I met your mother at the library about 10 years ago. She asked me how to make her daughter safe without ever needing to beg for help. She didn't want donations, she wanted dignity." Zariah felt her eyes sting, but she didn't cry. "She never told me," she said quietly. "She didn't want to burden you," Mr. Godfrey replied. "She said you had enough weight on your shoulders, being a young black girl in a world that sees skin before soul." He paused, then reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope. "She wrote this for you, told me not to give it to you until the money was real and you were ready to hear the truth." Zariah took the envelope with shaking hands. It was her mother's handwriting, the same soft loops, the same way she dotted her eyes with little hearts, like she used to on Zariah's birthday cards. She opened it. The letter was short. "Baby girl, if you're reading this, I've already left. I'm so sorry. But I need you to know, I didn't leave empty-handed. I left with a plan, and you were always the center of it. This money isn't to make you rich. It's to give you choices, to buy you the one thing I never had. Time. Time to heal. Time to dream. Time to build something that matters. Don't let them tell you who you are based on your shoes. Let them look twice. And when they do, stand taller. All my love, Mama." Zariah pressed the letter to her chest. No tears, just a stillness, a quiet that settled into her bones. Mr. Godfrey sat back. "There's something else." He pulled up another screen. "Your mom didn't just set aside money for you. She also filed paperwork to create a charitable foundation. Once you turn 18, you'll have the option to activate it. She called it the Sunlight Fund. Said it was for kids like you, bright, kind, but struggling in the shadows." Zariah blinked. "She did all this while working 3 jobs?" Mr. Godfrey nodded. "Yes, because she believed in something bigger than survival. She believed in legacy." Miss Riley finally spoke. "We'll set up appointments to help you manage the trust. There's a legal guardian clause and a monthly stipend in the meantime. But the account is secure. It's yours." Zariah looked down at her shoes, the ones everyone laughed at, and then back at the screen. "I used to think money was the goal," she said. "Now I know it's just a tool. My mama didn't raise me to be rich. She raised me to be ready." Just when Zariah thought her world had finally shifted in her favor, when it felt like the weight she'd been carrying for years was beginning to lift, another storm rolled in. This one didn't come from the streets. It came from upstairs. 20 minutes after she left Conference Room 2, Zariah sat quietly in the bank's waiting lounge. She held her mother's letter in both hands, eyes scanning each word over and over like they were sacred scripture. And they were. In every looped letter, every carefully chosen phrase, she could feel her mother's voice, strong and steady, reaching across the silence. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her, didn't notice the elevator ding, didn't look up until she heard that voice again. "Ms. Monroe, we need to speak, now." It was Bradley Keene. His face was flushed. Gone was the smug superiority from earlier. In its place was something sharp and cold, panic, dressed up in professionalism. Zariah stood, startled. "Did I do something wrong?" He didn't answer, just turned sharply and walked down the hall. She followed, confused, holding her letter like a shield. They entered a small boardroom on the third floor, colder, darker than the others. The blinds were drawn. The air smelled like toner and stress. Inside were 3 other people, a man in a gray suit with a government badge clipped to his belt, a woman with a legal pad and tight mouth, and Miss Riley, who now looked more uncomfortable than composed. Zariah sat at the long wooden table, her hands folded in her lap. Mr. Keene cleared his throat. "This meeting is about protocol," he began, "about certain irregularities regarding your account." Zariah's stomach tightened. What kind of irregularities? The man with the badge leaned forward. "I'm Agent Harlan, with the Department of Treasury. Ms. Monroe, are you aware that accounts of this size, especially those initiated through cash-heavy deposits, can trigger federal review?" Zariah blinked. No, I just got the card last week. My mom set it up. She passed away." The woman with the legal pad spoke next. "We're not accusing you of anything, but we have to be thorough. There are concerns that the account may have been used for money laundering or set up using fraudulent identification." Zariah felt the ground tilt beneath her. "Are you saying my mom was a criminal?" "We're saying we don't know," Agent Harlan said, "and that's the problem." Mr. Keene folded his arms. "I find it suspicious that a waitress with no formal financial training managed to structure a trust account with this level of sophistication. It's entirely possible someone else was involved, someone who used your mother as a cover." Zariah's jaw clenched. She wasn't stupid. "No one said she was," the woman replied, but her tone said otherwise. Zariah's hands balled into fists. She worked 3 jobs, read financial books from the library, took online courses at night. She planned this for 10 years.
Keene scoffed. "We have no way to verify that." "I do." The voice came from the doorway. Mr. Godfrey. He stepped inside, holding a stack of documents in a leather binder. His voice was calm, but his eyes were fire. "I mentored Althea Monroe for over a decade. Every transaction in that account has a paper trail. Every policy, every bond, every deposit, documented, witnessed, notarized. There are emails, receipts, and timelines to match." He slapped the binder down on the table. "I suggest you review the facts before you insult the memory of a woman who outworked half this town." For a moment, no one spoke. Miss Riley glanced at the documents. "If this is accurate—" "It is," Mr. Godfrey snapped. "And let me be clear. If this young woman is harassed further without probable cause, I will personally file complaints with both the State Banking Commission and the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency." Agent Harlan cleared his throat, suddenly looking much less confident. "We'll review the documents. If everything checks out, we'll close the case." Zariah looked up at Mr. Godfrey. "Is that it?" He placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "For now." Keene muttered something under his breath, but no one paid him any mind. Zariah stood tall. "You didn't believe I belonged here," she said, looking straight at Keene. "But my mother did. She believed enough for the both of us." She walked out of the boardroom, letter in hand, head held high. Because even in a room full of doubt, Zariah Monroe now knew the truth. Her mother had built more than a bank account. She had built a legacy that not even fear could shake. Bradley Keene didn't always look down on people. Once upon a time, he was one of them. Born and raised in rural North Carolina, Bradley grew up in a trailer park off a forgotten highway exit. His father was a factory foreman who drank more than he worked. His mother, when she was around, worked the night shift at a textile mill. Money was tight. Love was tighter still. By the time he turned 17, Bradley had learned that in his town, your future was measured by how fast you could leave it behind. And he did. He got into college on a scholarship no one expected him to keep, worked nights at a copy center, skipped meals to afford textbooks, graduated with honors, landed his first banking job at 22, pressing cheap suits and sleeping 4 hours a night. For the first few years, he remembered where he came from. He gave money to his mom, helped his kid sister pay rent, volunteered once a month at a career center teaching people how to balance checkbooks. He believed in hard work, in pulling yourself up, in playing by the rules. But then the recession hit.
Bradley had just bought his first house, a modest brick ranch with a neat lawn and a mortgage he could barely afford. He'd finally gotten a promotion, a corner office, respect, and then it was gone. The bank collapsed overnight. Mergers, layoffs, names he'd shaken hands with on Friday didn't answer phones on Monday. His savings dried up in 6 months. The house foreclosed. The car repossessed. The girl he'd been planning to propose to packed up and moved back to Chicago. He went home to his father's trailer for a while, slept on a couch that smelled like beer and resentment. It was the lowest point of his life. But Keene was nothing if not a survivor. He clawed his way back into the industry, starting over as a teller in a small-town branch. And when the promotions came again, slower this time, he took them with a new mindset. Never be poor again. Never be weak again. Never be mistaken for the kid from the trailer. And somewhere in that climb, something inside him hardened. He stopped volunteering, stopped smiling at people who came in looking unsure or overwhelmed. He started believing in what he called visible worth. The suit, the shoes, the posture. If you didn't have it, he assumed you weren't serious. When he transferred to Savannah, he saw it as a second chance. This branch was historic, prestigious, high net worth clientele. He intended to run it clean, efficient, and without complication. And then Zariah walked in. Shoes worn, dress faded, hair neat but clearly done at home. To him, it looked like trouble. Like the past trying to walk into the future he'd bled to build. So he mocked her, not because she deserved it, but because he didn't know how to handle the version of himself he saw reflected in her. The one who used to struggle, who used to hope, who used to walk into rooms scared but determined. Keene didn't know it then, but he was afraid. Afraid of being exposed. Afraid that all his success was still paper thin. Afraid that if someone like Zariah could belong in the same room as him, maybe he hadn't climbed as high as he thought. That boardroom confrontation shook him, not because he got caught, but because he realized, maybe for the first time in years, that being right and being good weren't the same thing. That it was entirely possible to follow protocol and still be cruel. After Zariah left the bank that day, Keene sat in his office long after closing. He pulled out a photograph he hadn't looked at in years. Him and his sister on graduation day, both smiling, both still full of belief. He couldn't remember the last time he felt that. And for the first time since the recession, Bradley Keene felt something he had buried long ago. Shame. Not because of Zariah's money, but because he'd forgotten how it felt to be invisible. And how much strength it takes to walk into a room where no one expects you to matter and demand to be seen. Just when it felt like the storm had passed, when Zariah finally believed things might stay calm for a while, her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail. She was curled up on the worn couch in their apartment, her mom sleeping just a room away, breathing steady for the first time in days thanks to new meds. But something made her pick up. "Hello?" A pause. Then a woman's voice, soft but firm. Is this Zariah Monroe? Yes. This is Sheila Denton. I'm a reporter with Savannah Ledger. I was hoping we could talk. Zariah sat up straighter. About what? About your experience at Atlantic Trust Bank. Zariah's heart skipped. How do you even know about that? Another pause. Let's just say someone in the lobby took a video. It's circulating, fast. Zariah's stomach turned cold. You're not in trouble, Sheila added quickly. In fact, quite the opposite. People are asking questions, a lot of them. Zariah looked over at the envelope on the coffee table, her mother's letter still tucked neatly inside. Her fingers tightened around the phone. I didn't ask for attention, she said. I know, but you walked into a space where you weren't supposed to belong, and now people are seeing it. They want to know who you are, and more importantly, who your mother was. Zariah didn't respond. Her mind was racing. That night, after her mom fell back asleep, she sat at the kitchen table and searched her name on social media. And there it was, the video. Grainy but clear. It showed her walking up to the counter, asking to check her balance. It caught Keen's voice, the mocking tone, the laughter. And it captured the exact moment his face went white as the screen lit up. The clip was barely 40 seconds, but it had been shared over 200,000 times. The caption read, "Girl in worn-out shoes just shut down an entire bank with one number." The comments were exploding. Some people praised her bravery. Others condemned Keen. A few asked questions Zariah wasn't sure how to answer. But one thing was clear. Her story wasn't hers anymore. It was in the world, and the world was watching. The next morning, the local news called, then a podcast, then a producer from a national morning show. Zariah didn't know what to say. Every time someone asked to tell her story, she wanted to scream that it wasn't just hers, that her mother was the one who had built it, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, quietly, invisibly, while no one was watching. So she called the one person who had never spoken down to her, Mr. Godfrey. He picked up on the first ring. I've been expecting your call.
You saw the video? Of course. What do I do? She asked, voice barely a whisper. There was a long pause. Then he said, You tell the truth. All of it. Not the version they want, the version that matters. Zariah exhaled. She felt the fear melt, just a little. 2 days later, she agreed to one interview. One. A sit-down conversation at the public library. The same library where her mother used to study late into the night, earbuds in, baby Zariah asleep in a stroller beside her. Sheila Denton met her there. Just one camera, one mic, no makeup crew or flashy lights. And when the recording began, Zariah didn't start with numbers. She started with her mom. She worked 3 jobs, Zariah said. Woke up before the sun. Came home long after it went down. Never asked for pity. Never made excuses. Just kept going. She paused. They thought I didn't belong in that bank because my shoes were falling apart, but they didn't see the miles I walked in them, the miles she walked, so I wouldn't have to. The interview went viral overnight, not because of the scandal, but because of the quiet strength in Zariah's voice, the clarity, the love. She didn't cry, didn't rage, just told the truth, with her mother's grace echoing in every sentence. And that's when the real twist happened. Donations started pouring in, not to Zariah, but to a local nonprofit fund for working single mothers. Schools called to ask if she would come speak. A publishing house reached out to discuss a children's book series inspired by her story. Even the bank, under new pressure, announced new training for all staff and pledged to fund financial literacy programs for underserved youth in Savannah. And at the center of it all was a girl with quiet eyes and second-hand shoes,
Zariah never asked to be a symbol. She just asked to check her balance. But the world saw her worth, and for once, it listened. 3 weeks after Zariah's story first aired, her world had started to settle, just a little. The donations had slowed, the news crews had moved on, and Zariah had returned to her daily rhythm: school in the morning, taking care of her mom in the afternoon, and homework at night. Normal never felt so precious. Then came the call that changed everything. Again. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Zariah had just come home from school, balancing a backpack full of books and a bag of groceries she'd bought with her new debit card. Her mom was asleep on the couch, the soft hum of daytime television in the background. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated. After the flood of media attention, she'd learned to be cautious. But something about this number felt different. She answered. "Hello? Ms. Monroe?" Her heart skipped. "This is Marcus Ellington. I'm calling from the Hollis Foundation." She blinked. "I'm sorry, who?" "The Hollis Foundation."
We're based in Atlanta. You probably haven't heard of us, but we've definitely heard about you. Zariah was already reaching for a pen. "Okay. I'm calling because we're deeply moved by your story, your mother's story. We've been working quietly for years to identify individuals like you, young people who represent not just resilience, but vision. You've shown the world what quiet strength looks like, and we believe it's time you had help carrying that forward." Zariah sat down slowly. "Help? How?" Marcus chuckled gently. "Let me get to the point. Our foundation manages private funds for legacy philanthropists. One of them, a woman who wishes to remain anonymous, saw your library interview, and she had a very specific reaction." Zariah held her breath. She said, and I quote, "That girl reminds me of someone I once failed to help. I won't fail her." There was a pause. "We'd like to give you a full scholarship to any high school or college prep academy you want to attend this fall. Everything is paid for: tuition, housing, food, and tech. That's not all, though. We also want to help start the Sunlight Fund, the nonprofit your mother always wanted to start. We will pay for everything you need to get it up and running, including startup costs, legal help, and strategic advice." Zariah gripped the edge of the table. "Wait, you're saying you'll fund the foundation?" "Yes, Miss Monroe, all of it. Also provide a mentorship team, legal guardianship support if needed. You'd retain ownership and decision-making, of course, but you'd no longer be alone in this." Tears welled up in her eyes. She hadn't even realized she was crying. She wiped her face quickly. "Why? Why would you do this for me?" Marcus's voice softened. "Because your mother planted a seed, and you're already growing something bigger than she ever dreamed. We just want to help you water it." Zariah sat back in stunned silence. After a moment, she whispered, "I thought people like me didn't get calls like this." He replied without hesitation, "People like you change the reason calls like this exist." When the call ended, she didn't move. She sat there, phone in her lap, the late afternoon sun slanting across the floor, catching the edge of the old picture frame on the wall. The one with her and her mom at her 5th grade science fair. Her mom in her diner uniform, still smiling like she owned the world. Zariah got up and went into the living room. Her mom stirred slightly. "Z?" Zariah sat beside her, took her hand. "Something just happened," she whispered. Althea blinked slowly, her eyes still heavy with fatigue, but focused. "Good or bad?" "Good," Zariah said, smiling through the tears. "Really good." Her mom nodded gently. "Then take it. Whatever it is, take it and run with it." Zariah squeezed her hand. "I will." That night, she opened a new notebook. On the front cover, she wrote 3 words in capital letters, "The Sunlight Fund," and beneath it, in smaller letters, "A foundation for kids like me and mothers like mine." She didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was chasing after the future. She felt like she was building it. The auditorium was packed.
Rows of folding chairs filled the community center, every seat taken, every eye facing the small stage draped in a plain blue curtain. News cameras stood silently in the back. Teachers, local leaders, students, even the mayor sat shoulder to shoulder, waiting. But Zariah Monroe wasn't thinking about any of them. She stood just behind the curtain, clutching a note card in one hand and smoothing her dress with the other. It was the only new outfit she owned, a soft yellow sundress with flat brown shoes and a silver chain around her neck. No heels, no glam squad, just herself. And a promise. She peeked out at the crowd. Front row, on the aisle, sat her mother. Still recovering, still weak, but there, wrapped in a shawl and glowing with pride. Mr. Godfrey sat beside her, hands folded, smiling softly. Maggie Clifton sat 2 seats over, nodding to everyone she knew, a quiet guardian of what was about to happen. On the stage stood a wooden podium with a single word engraved on a bronze plaque: sunlight. The room dimmed. A hush fell, and the announcer's voice broke the silence. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the founder of the Sunlight Fund, Miss Zariah Monroe. She stepped into the light. The applause started slowly, then swelled, not out of celebrity or obligation, but out of respect. She walked to the podium, her note card trembling slightly in her hand, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. 3 months ago, she began, I walked into a bank to check my balance. A few chuckles from the crowd, gentle, knowing. I had on old shoes, a dress that didn't fit quite right, and I got laughed at, mocked, judged, because people assumed they knew my worth by looking at my feet. She paused, letting the room grow still again. But my mother taught me something different. She said worth isn't loud, it's not flashy, it doesn't walk in wearing designer sneakers. It shows up every day, quiet, consistent, and it builds. She looked down at her note, then set it aside. Some of you already know the story. How my mom worked 3 jobs, how she opened a savings account no one knew about, how she built a financial plan with library books and late-night research, how she left me a legacy I didn't understand until the moment someone told me I didn't belong. She looked up, her voice stronger now. But this isn't just about me, and it's not even just about her. It's about every kid who's ever been overlooked because their shoes weren't new. Every student who got skipped because their voice was too soft. Every parent who sacrificed sleep, pride, and health just to keep the lights on. Applause rippled through the room. Zariah smiled, but her eyes stayed focused. The Sunlight Fund isn't a charity. It's not a handout. It's a spotlight. It exists to remind kids like me that just because you come from the shadows doesn't mean you're not meant to shine. She stepped away from the podium and picked up a small wooden box. Inside were the first 10 scholarship award letters. 10 names, 10 stories. She read them slowly, one by one. Anaya, whose mom cleans hotel rooms and just got accepted into a coding program. Tyrese, who takes care of his younger brothers every night and still made the honor roll. Rosa, whose dad got laid off but still finds a way to get her to art class every Saturday. Every name carried weight. Every name brought tears. And when she finished, the room was silent again, this time with reverence. Then, from the back, a voice called out, "Zariah!" She turned. It was Bradley Keene, the same man who had mocked her, who had tried to dismiss her. Now standing with his hands folded, wearing no suit, no tie, just a simple dress shirt and slacks. "I just wanted to say," he began, then stopped. The room waited. "I was wrong," he said simply. "And you've changed more than a bank. You've changed me." Zariah nodded. "Thank you." That was all, and it was enough. The crowd stood to their feet. Applause shook the walls. Althea wiped her eyes. Mr. Godfrey gripped his cane a little tighter. Because at that moment, things had changed. Zariah Monroe, the girl with the old shoes, had grown into something bigger than her past. She had taken on her legacy, and she was just getting started. Zariah Monroe didn't change all of a sudden. She still got up early every morning to make tea for her mom. She still took the bus to school, made her own lunch, and walked past the same cracked sidewalks she had always known. But something inside her had changed. She moved differently now, not with pride, but with purpose. She knew what it was like to have a name, a mission, and a story that wasn't just hers anymore. After the launch of the Sunlight Fund, Zariah found herself pulled in every direction. Interviews, meetings, invitations to speak, requests for advice from grown men in suits who suddenly treated her like she belonged in boardrooms. At first, it was overwhelming. She didn't know how to handle the attention. She wasn't used to people calling her Miss Monroe or asking if she had a preferred title. She still wore the same braided hairstyle her mother taught her. She still wrote essays in the margins of old notebooks. But slowly, she grew into her role. Not because someone told her to, because she earned it. One Saturday morning, she stood in front of a classroom of fifth graders at her old elementary school. Their teacher had invited her to speak about what success looks like. She brought in a shoebox. Inside it were her worn-out shoes, the ones she wore into the bank the day everything changed. She held them up. "These," she said, "are what success looks like to me." The kids stared, wide-eyed. Not because they were new, she explained, but because they held, because they carried me through every hard day, because they were enough. A girl in the back raised her hand. "Are you rich now?" Zariah smiled. "Some people would say yes, but what matters more is that I feel safe now. That's what real wealth is. Safety, freedom, choice." Later that day, she donated the shoes to a glass display case at the local library, right next to a plaque that read, "Let them look twice." She wasn't just building a legacy, she was rewriting the definition of success in her community. She started working part-time with a local nonprofit, designing after-school financial literacy programs for teens. She didn't want anyone else to have to wait until they were 15 to learn what a savings account was. She knew that power came from knowledge, not just dollars. But Zariah didn't stop at programs. She launched a mentorship circle. Young women of color helping each other navigate scholarships, applications, public speaking, self-worth. She called it Bright Roots because, as she once told a local reporter, even sunflowers need strong roots to grow. At home, things changed too. Her mom's health stabilized. With better care, nutritious food, and less stress, Althea began smiling again, really smiling. She started writing poetry, something she hadn't done since high school. Zariah framed one of her mom's poems and hung it over the kitchen table. It read, "I walked so you could run, but I see now you were always meant to fly." They had more now, a better apartment, groceries that didn't have to come from the clearance bin. But Zariah made one thing clear. Money would never change the values her mother raised her with. She still walked when she didn't need to, still listened more than she talked, still wore that silver necklace every single day, the one her mom bought from a yard sale for $2 when Zariah turned 10. One afternoon, Zariah ran into a girl she used to go to middle school with. The girl looked her up and down. "Didn't expect to see you back here," she said. Zariah just smiled. "Why not?" The girl shrugged. "Figured you'd be somewhere fancy by now." Zariah's smile didn't fade. "This is still my home, and you don't fix something by walking away from it." By fall, she had offers from prep schools and early college programs across the country, full scholarships, high praise, even a letter from the White House. But Zariah made her own path. She accepted a hybrid program that let her stay close to her mother while studying social impact and finance remotely. Her dream? To become a community economist, someone who helps small towns rebuild from the inside out. Because to her, success was never about leaving. It was about lifting. One block at a time, one family at a time, one girl in worn-out shoes at a time. It started with a food pantry, a quiet, underfunded room behind the community rec center that only opened twice a month. Zariah remembered standing in that line with her mother when she was 9, clutching a reusable grocery bag and pretending not to notice when the shelf of cereal ran empty. Years later, she returned, not to receive, but to rebuild. With her first Sunlight Fund grant, she partnered with the pantry's volunteers and hired a local contractor. Within a month, the room had doubled in size. Fresh produce, things that need to be kept cold, diapers, products for feminine care, food for pets. No more shame, no more lines that felt like punishment. She renamed it the Market Room, because every human being deserves to feel like a customer, not a case file. From there, the work grew. By year's end, the Sunlight Fund had touched over 1,200 lives across the metro area. Not just with money, but with dignity. Zariah funded free Wi-Fi hubs for underserved neighborhoods, so students didn't have to do homework on library steps. She helped launch a mobile tutoring program, sending college volunteers in brightly painted vans to bus stops and church parking lots where kids gathered after school. She installed secure lockers outside public shelters so unhoused individuals could store medication and documents without fear of theft. She met with city council members about expanding late-night bus service for hourly workers who couldn't afford rideshare apps. And everywhere she went, she asked the same question. What do you need, really? Not what looks good on a grant report, not what makes donors feel charitable, but what actually changes daily life. Because Zariah knew what it meant to count quarters at a laundromat, to memorize the school lunch menu, to pray for one more week before the eviction notice came. She wasn't guessing, she was remembering. One afternoon, she visited the local middle school, where the principal told her a story about a girl who'd stopped coming to class. When the school checked in, they learned the girl had no clean clothes, no hygiene products, no shoes with holes. Zariah left that meeting and created Closet 47, a donation-based, student-run clothing closet inside every public school in the district. Not a handout center, a boutique experience. Mirrors, dressing rooms, stylists, respect. Kids signed up to manage inventory, learning both fashion and finance. The pride on their faces when a classmate walked out with a new jacket, pure magic. News of Zariah's work spread, not through headlines this time, through whispers, through the language of impact. Barbers offered free cuts, churches opened their kitchens, artists painted murals with messages like, "We see you," and "Dignity is a human right." And in the center of it all was a teenage girl who still answered her emails at midnight and kept every thank you letter in a shoebox under her bed. She didn't ask for parades. She asked for accountability. Because she knew attention faded, but change, real change, required staying power. In a city council meeting 6 months after the Sunlight Fund launched, Zariah sat quietly in the back row until public comment opened. She stood, took the mic, and said, "My name is Zariah Monroe. You know my story. But I'm not here as a symbol. I'm here as a citizen." She paused, looking directly at the council. "And I want to know how you're spending your budget." The room went silent. One member cleared her throat. "Excuse me?" Zariah stepped forward. "I want to know how much is going to community housing, mental health, transit, and how much is going to office renovations and photo ops." The tension was thick. But one by one, members began to shift in their seats. And by the end of that meeting, 2 new proposals were moved forward, one for affordable youth housing and another to expand the city's community grant board to include under 25 residents. Zariah didn't just speak truth to power. She redefined who counted as powerful. Back at home, neighbors began calling her Mayor Monroe. She laughed it off, but they meant it. Because she had done something most politicians never could. She had made people believe again. Believe that someone was watching, that someone cared, that someone who looked like them, talked like them, lived like them, had made it and came back, not to brag, to build. It came on a rainy Tuesday, the kind of rain that hangs low and heavy, soaking everything. Not loud, just persistent, like a secret that won't go away. Zariah was sitting at the back table in her favorite cafe, the one with the creaky chairs and lopsided tables. She liked it because no one bothered her there. She could write, plan, breathe. She had her laptop open, half a sandwich left, and a spreadsheet full of numbers in front of her. It was the next phase of Sunlight. Expansion into neighboring counties, talks with a foundation in Chicago, even early discussions of a mobile clinic initiative. She was in the zone. Until the cafe door opened, and in walked Bradley Keene. She hadn't seen him in months, not since the auditorium. He looked different, no suit, just jeans, a rain-soaked jacket, and a backpack slung over one shoulder. His hair was longer, grayer. His face less guarded. He spotted her, paused, then walked over. "Hi," he said, voice softer than she remembered. Zariah raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Keene?" He smiled faintly. "Just Bradley these days." She gestured to the empty seat. "Didn't think I'd see you in this part of town." "I've been spending more time here lately," he said, sitting down. "Volunteering. Learning." She nodded slowly, still watching. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. "I've said sorry. That was easy. But I haven't really done anything to make it right." Zariah closed her laptop. "Okay, I'm listening." He pulled out a folder from his backpack and slid it across the table. "I sold the house," he said, "and the second property. Moved into a 1-bedroom apartment across town." Zariah blinked. "Wait, what?" He nodded. "Downsized my life. Took some time off. Did some reading. Met with people I never made time for before." She opened the folder. Inside was a letter of intent, a signed statement from his lawyer, and a certified donation confirmation. $5 million? She read aloud. "To the Sunlight Fund." He nodded. Zariah stared at him. "But why now?" Bradley leaned forward, elbows on the table, rain dripping from his sleeves. "I used to think legacy was about buildings with your name on them, endowments, portraits. But it's not. It's about who you lift while you're still here." He hesitated. "My mother," he said, voice breaking slightly, "used to be a waitress." Zariah looked up. "She died when I was 22. I never really talked about it. Never wanted to be associated with that part of my life. I buried it, along with everything she taught me." He exhaled. "You brought her back. Not with a speech, not with your bank balance, with your strength, your clarity. You made me remember her." He shook his head, eyes glassy. "She used to say, 'Don't get so rich you forget how to be kind.' I forgot, until you." Zariah didn't speak for a moment. Then she slid the folder back to him. "I can't take your money unless you help decide where it goes. No vanity projects, no gold plaques." He smiled, nodding. "Deal." Later that week, the news broke. Former bank executive donates fortune to girl he once mocked. Headlines ran. Social media lit up. Comment sections overflowed. But Zariah didn't care about that. Because the real twist wasn't the money. It wasn't the apology. It was the redemption. Bradley Keene didn't just give up his wealth. He gave up his pride. He joined the Sunlight Board as an unpaid advisor, sat in folding chairs, took notes, asked questions he used to think were beneath him, and he started showing up to school board meetings, to town halls, to community breakfasts where nobody knew his name, and that was just fine by him. Zariah had always believed that people could change. Now she had proof.
Because sometimes the real twist at the end of a story isn't that the underdog wins. It's that the villain finally learns how to lose, gracefully, and becomes something else entirely. The sun broke through the clouds just as Zariah stepped out of the rec center that morning. It had been a long night. Grant reviews, program updates, and a last-minute meeting with the mayor's office. But somehow, it didn't feel exhausting anymore. It felt like movement, like momentum. Across the street, a little girl in a pink coat ran toward the building, tugging her mother's hand. Zariah smiled. She recognized them. The girl had been one of the first students to benefit from the Bright Roots mentorship program. They passed her on the steps, and the mother paused. "Miss Zariah," she said softly, "thank you. My daughter told me you made her feel like she mattered. No one's ever done that before." Zariah's eyes filled with quiet warmth. "I'm just holding the door," she said. The woman smiled, nodded, and kept walking. That was the truth, wasn't it? Zariah hadn't built some empire. She hadn't changed the whole world. But she had opened doors. Doors that had been slammed shut for girls like her for generations. And once those doors were open, she didn't walk through them alone. She held them wide. For her mother, for her community, for every child who had ever been laughed at, overlooked, or underestimated just because of where they came from, the color of their skin, or the state of their shoes. She walked home that morning, choosing to skip the ride. The sidewalk cracked beneath her feet, but the city felt different now. Not perfect, not fixed, but seen. Her phone buzzed. It was an email from her scholarship coordinator. Subject line, "You're going to DC." She had been selected to represent her district at the National Youth Leadership Summit. A flight was already booked, a panel seat reserved. The email ended with, "Your story inspired thousands. Now your voice will help shape policy." Zariah sat on a bench at the bus stop and stared at the screen, stunned. She thought of her mom, the apartment, the shoes, the first time she walked into that bank. She thought of how far she had come. Then she closed the email, put the phone in her pocket, and looked around. 3 teenage boys were huddled under the awning across the street. One had a split sneaker sole, flapping with every step. They were laughing, pushing each other, full of life, but there was hunger in their eyes. Not just for food, for something more. She crossed the street, introduced herself, asked what they wanted to be, when no one was watching, when they weren't trying to sound cool. One said he liked fixing things. Another wanted to rap. The third shrugged, but Zariah didn't let him off easy. "You've got something in you," she said. "You just haven't been asked the right question yet."
That's what legacy looks like. Not in awards, not in magazine spreads, but in conversations that change the way someone sees themselves. Zariah Monroe had been a waitress's daughter in worn-out shoes. Now, she was a blueprint, a mirror, a voice, and most of all, a reminder that your worth was never about your balance. It was about your bravery, your compassion, your refusal to let the world's cruelty become your compass. That's the lesson. Not that money changes everything, but that dignity, love, and vision can turn pain into purpose. So the next time you see someone in shoes with holes, look again. They might be the one holding the map. This is a story about Black people. We at Hidden Worth think that every story like Zariah's should be told, not to get sympathy, but to show strength. Don't let this story end here if it made you feel something, inspired you, or made you think twice. Give it to others. Speak about it. Think about who you are ignoring. And most of all, keep this in mind. Your story is important, even when the world tells you it doesn't, especially at that time. We'll be right here, telling the stories that other people don't, one voice at a time.